This video is brought to you by Nebula. For weeks now, mass protests have been spreading across Serbia and are testing President Aleksandar Vučić's grip on power. The Novi Sad tragedy has served as a catalyst for a broader wave of dissatisfaction with the Serbian Progressive Party, or SNS, which has dominated Serbian politics for over a decade. So, in this video, we're going to have a look at how Vučić rose to power, how he's maintained a political dominance since, and whether these protests could spell the end of his rule. Explore which world leaders are winning and which are losing every week with our new podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. First, let's start with some context. Vucic, the strongman that has come to dominate Serbian politics, began his political career in the height of the Yugoslav wars, as a member and later General Secretary of the ultranationalist Serbian Radical Party. Vucic later became part of the socialist government as the Minister of Information under Slobodan Milosevic. As Minister of Information, the country's media landscape went under significant overhaul. Foreign TV networks were banned, and the national pro-government media was widely accused of broadcasting Serbian nationalist propaganda. Meanwhile, journalists who were critical of Milosevic and his policies during the Kosovo War, NATO's bombing campaign and international sanctions faced threats, harassment, and in some severe instances were murdered. The decade after the ousting of Milosevic in 2000 was marked by the rise of corruption and organised crime. During this period, Vucic co-founded the populist SNS party in 2008, a pro-European offshoot of the Radical Party, which ran on an anti-corruption platform against the ruling Democratic Party, which had itself become embroiled in a series of corruption scandals. In 2012, Vucic's SNS won the parliamentary elections and became Serbia's largest party, forming a government with the socialists. Vucic immediately experienced a meteoric rise to power, becoming first Deputy Prime Minister, then President of the SNS, and later Serbia's Prime Minister in 2014. He was elected President in 2017 and re-elected in 2022. As time went on, his rule took on a steadily more authoritarian bent. In 2023, Serbia's Corruption Perception Index score dropped to an all-time low, ranking Serbia as the second most corrupt country in Europe and placing it 104th out of 180 countries, down from 77th in 2017 before Vucic became president. Under Vucic, Serbia has essentially become a soft autocracy, or as Freedom House has described it, partly free. What this means is that although the country still has a democratic veneer with regular elections and a political opposition, Vucic's tight control over the government, judiciary and security forces skews the democratic process heavily in his favour. This is particularly evident in the country's media, as Vucic and his administration have gained stakes in major media outlets who rely heavily on state advertising, which gives them a financial incentive to push a pro-government narrative. His critics also accuse Vucic of using similar tactics to when he was Milosevic's Minister of Information, threatening and intimidating journalists. He's so far been able to close the lid on dissent by boasting over the country's large infrastructure projects, and boasting that he's brought years of stability for the economy, which has seen wages, employment and GDP grow quickly, albeit this doesn't take into account inflation. Moreover, many citizens are also happy to overlook some of Vucic's autocratic tendencies, because they view the alternative, a weak opposition widely considered elitist and out of touch, as worse. However, in the last year and a half or so, multiple mass protests have engulfed the country, which have tested Vucic's grip on power. The first protest began back in summer 2023, following two mass shootings, which Vucic's critics blamed on the government-controlled media outlets for spurring a culture of violence. In response, Vucic called for snap elections, but mass protests erupted again following claims of electoral fraud after his party won a landslide victory. Then, a few months later, in August 2024, protests erupted again over environmental concerns after Vucic signed a $2.4 billion lithium mining deal with the EU and Rio Tinto, which was actually banned 2 years ago following, you guessed it, mass protests. Things became worse for Vucic when, last November, the canopy of a recently renovated railway station in Novi Sad, Serbia's second largest city, collapsed, tragically resulting in the deaths of 15 people. Critics quickly attributed the disaster to poor reconstruction work, fueled by allegations of corruption and nepotism. For instance, the contract terms, awarded to a consortium of Chinese companies that employed local subcontractors, were kept secret, raising serious eyebrows. Then it was revealed that thorough inspections of the renovations were never conducted. Some of Vucic's critics also claim the project's cost, almost €16 million, was significantly inflated, suggesting some of the funds weren't used on the project, but rather lined the pockets of corrupt state officials. Whilst the prosecutor's office indicted 13 people involved in the project, including a foreign minister, the indictment conveniently skipped over corruption. Whilst the transport minister resigned, he did not take any responsibility for the tragedy. University students, frustrated over the lack of accountability, began to stage protests and have since blockaded most universities across the country, demanding for the release of the construction documents and a proper financial investigation. On the 22nd of December, over 100,000 people gathered in Belgrade, marking one of the biggest protests since Milosevic was toppled 2 decades ago. Protests have continued well into the new year, while striking students have reported pressure from Serbian state security after pro-government media published personal data of some of the protesters. Vucic has also clamped down, accusing protesting students of receiving money from the West. An NGO also filed a criminal complaint against Vucic for inciting violence against the students, after a driver rammed a student protest in Belgrade last week, injuring one woman. Anyway, this has only intensified the protests, and thousands recently gathered in front of Serbia's state TV, accusing it of pro-government bias. Meanwhile, social tensions are being compounded by external pressures. US sanctions targeting Serbia's oil company NIS have sparked fears of further fallout, particularly among disgruntled farmers who are now facing the loss of subsidies for cheaper fuel. Farmers have joined the protests, pledging to physically protect the students, and have brought tractors in a show of solidarity. With the protests now continuing for nearly 3 months, the big question seems to be, how does it all end? Well, a lot will depend on whether the opposition, who right now haven't been directly involved in the protests, can essentially get their act together, as currently they're not really a viable alternative to Vucic's regime. While some have drawn parallels of the scale of protest to the student-led movement, which played a significant role in bringing down Milosevic, the complete ousting of Vucic seems very unlikely. Still, according to recent polling, 52% of Serbs will vote against Vucic if it comes to a referendum on whether he should stay in office. Vucic dismissed the findings as foreign influence, but called upon opposition parties to initiate a referendum. The opposition rejected the referendum, describing it as political bait, an attempt by Vucic to consolidate his power, and called for a transitional government, which Vucic swiftly dismissed. History suggests that, if protests continue to escalate, he'll react by trying to consolidate his power. Like a lot of things, this whole situation is very much in a state of flux. With us entering a new year and Trump re-entering the White House, well, the world has felt more stable, hasn't it? Every day we're faced with weird headlines, from Trump's attempts to take over Canada and Elon's wild ride in Europe, or even Trump trying to swap New Jersey for a shiny Charizard on the playground. Okay, that last one might not be real, but we do dive into the chaotic world of US politics in our series WTF USA. That's our series where we explain everything that's happened across the pond in the land of the free. Because while the election might be over, with Trump in the Oval Office, the number of WTF moments only looks likely to increase. Unlike some of our other more serious videos, the tone of WTF USA is more light-hearted, and takes something of an irreverent look at what's going on. If you're interested, WTF can be found exclusively on Nebula. Now, if you didn't know, Nebula is an independent, creator-owned streaming platform that specializes in thoughtful content. Over there, you can find creators like Wendover Productions, Real Life Law, and Legal Eagle, with many of them releasing their very own original series on the platform. We're super proud of WTF USA, and we hope that with your support, we'll be able to make other interesting, weird, and entertaining series with Nebula in the future. So signing up genuinely helps TLDR to grow and expand. You can also watch every normal TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in some instances before they land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, click our link in the description to get 40% off. We really hope you check out the series, and as always, thanks for your support.